The summer heat was suffocating that day. City streets buzzed with the usual midday noise, car horns, distant construction, and the chatter of people trying to survive another workday. John walked into the car dealership, sweat forming tiny droplets on his forehead. He'd been saving money for months, dreaming about this moment. Not just any car. A top-tier luxury vehicle that represented everything he'd worked hard to achieve. The showroom gleamed with polished surfaces and expensive machines. Rows of sleek cars stood like silent soldiers, each promising a different kind of freedom. John adjusted his crisp white shirt, making sure he looked professional. Years of struggle had taught him one thing: appearance matters. The senior salesman noticed him entering. His eyes quickly scanned John from head to toe, making a split-second judgment. Something in his expression changed, a subtle shift that spoke volumes about his internal prejudices. John noticed it immediately. He'd seen that look countless times before. "Can I help you?" the salesman asked, his tone flat and uninviting. John smiled, keeping his composure. "I'm interested in the latest model," he said, pointing to a stunning black sedan near the window. The salesman's eyebrow raised slightly. His body language screamed skepticism. John knew exactly what was happening. He'd been through this game countless times, the subtle racism disguised as professional skepticism. "And do you have an appointment?" the man asked, deliberately avoiding direct eye contact. John pulled out a neat folder containing his financial documents. Bank statements, credit reports, everything meticulously organized. He knew he had to be twice as prepared, twice as professional to be taken seriously. What the salesman didn't know was that John wasn't just another customer. Behind his calm exterior was a network of connections that spread through the city like an intricate web. Every disrespectful glance, every dismissive comment was being mentally recorded. The tension in the room was thick. Other salespeople noticed the interaction, some shifting uncomfortably, others pretending to be busy with paperwork. John remained composed, his years of experience teaching him that emotional reactions would only confirm the stereotype the salesman wanted to see. "I'd like to test drive the top-tier model," John said, his voice steady and confident. The salesman's face changed. A mix of surprise, anger, and something darker flickered across his features. Years of unchecked prejudice were about to explode in the most unexpected way. Little did he know, this moment would become a turning point. Not just for him, but for everyone connected to this seemingly ordinary encounter in a car dealership on a scorching summer day. The first move was about to be made, and it would change everything. The silence in the showroom became electric. One moment stretched into another, filled with unspoken tension that seemed to crackle like static electricity. The salesman's hand clenched slightly. His face turned a shade of red that spoke volumes about his inner rage. Years of buried anger, of feeling threatened by changing social dynamics, were about to burst through his professional facade. "Listen," he said, his voice low and dangerous. "I don't think you understand how this works." John remained calm. He'd navigated these waters before, subtle racism disguised as professional protocol. His eyes never left the salesman, catching every micro-expression, every slight movement that revealed the man's true intentions. Something shifted in the atmosphere. Other customers nearby began to notice. A couple near the window exchanged uncomfortable glances. A young sales assistant looked down, suddenly very interested in her paperwork. The salesman took a step closer. His breath was hot, carrying the smell of stale coffee and something more toxic, pure, unfiltered hatred. "These cars aren't for everyone," he muttered, just loud enough for John to hear. What happened next would become a moment etched in the dealership's history. In a movement so quick most people would miss it, the salesman's hand rose. There was no time to react, no moment to dodge. A sharp sound, like a crack of lightning, broke through the showroom's carefully maintained silence. The slap landed hard, echoing through the polished space. For a split second, everything stopped. Customers froze. Sales staff looked up in shock. The pristine showroom became a theater of unexpected drama. John didn't move. Not immediately. His cheek burned, not just from the physical impact, but from years of accumulated pain, of silent endurance, of calculated restraint. The salesman realized his mistake the moment his hand dropped. Something in John's eyes changed. It wasn't anger. It wasn't even surprise. It was something far more dangerous. A calm, calculated response that suggested this moment was just the beginning of something much larger. "May I have your name?" John asked, his voice surprisingly steady. No anger, no emotion. Just a simple, direct question that felt more like a promise than a request. The salesman, suddenly aware of the witnesses, of potential consequences, stammered. His confident rage melted into something desperate, something fearful. John pulled out his phone, not to call the police, not to create a scene, just to carefully document everything: the time, the location, the salesman's name tag, the witnesses around him. Some stories begin with a dramatic moment, some with a whisper. This one started with a slap that would echo far beyond the showroom's polished floors. The game had just changed, and nobody in the room, least of all the salesman, understood how completely their world was about to be turned upside down. Outside the showroom, two vehicles waited. Sleek black SUVs with tinted windows that seemed to blend into the city's background. Most people would walk past without a second glance. But these weren't ordinary vehicles. They were connected to something far more complex. Inside one of the SUVs, two men watched the dealership's glass doors. They weren't just observers. They were guardians, carefully monitoring every movement, every interaction happening inside the building. When the slap happened, they didn't move, didn't react. Their training was different. Their response would come later, calculated and precise. The city had layers most people never saw. Beneath the surface of everyday life, networks of power and influence moved like underground rivers. John wasn't just a random customer. He was a key player in a complex system that most people would never understand. Years of strategic planning, of building connections, of creating an intricate web of influence, all of this had prepared him for moments exactly like this. The slap wasn't just a personal insult. It was an opportunity. In another part of the city, phones began to buzz. Not with random notifications, but with carefully coded messages. People who looked like ordinary citizens, coffee shop owners, real estate agents, small business owners, started to move pieces on a much larger chessboard. The salesman had no idea. His moment of rage was about to become a turning point in his entire life. What seemed like a simple act of disrespect would unravel everything he thought he knew about power, consequences, and survival. John's phone buzzed. A single message. No names, no direct instructions, just a series of numbers and a timestamp. To an outsider, it would look like nonsense. But to those in the know, it was a precise set of instructions. The dealership's manager was about to have a very interesting day. Information began to move. Quietly, systematically. Each piece carefully placed, each connection strategically activated. The network John had built wasn't about violence. It was about something far more powerful: systematic, institutional response. 2 blocks away, a legal team started preparing documents. Across town, business connections were being subtly adjusted. The salesman's world was about to shrink, not through direct confrontation, but through a network of calculated moves. John remained calm. His hand still stung from the slap, but his mind was already 10 steps ahead. This wasn't about revenge. This was about sending a message, about showing that actions have consequences far beyond a moment of anger. The SUVs outside didn't move, but something was changing, slowly, deliberately. The city had its own rhythm, its own rules, and today, those rules were about to be rewritten. Silence can be louder than words, and in the days following the showroom incident, silence became John's most powerful weapon. His team worked like invisible threads, weaving through the city's complex social fabric. Each person had a specific role, a precise task that contributed to a larger, almost invisible mechanism of investigation and response. A coffee shop owner near the dealership started casual conversations, not aggressive, not threatening, just carefully placed questions that seemed innocent but carried deeper meaning. Say, "Got anything interesting at work lately?" The kind of conversation that makes people nervous without knowing exactly why. Meanwhile, a local real estate agent began quietly checking public records: birth certificates, property ownership, employment history. Each document told a story, not just about the salesman, but about the entire ecosystem that had allowed such behavior to exist. John himself remained surprisingly calm. His office, A modest space that revealed nothing about his true influence became a central hub of quiet activity. Phones rarely rang. Conversations happened in whispers, but something significant was brewing. The salesman had no idea his entire world was being meticulously mapped. Every connection, every vulnerability was being identified, not for immediate destruction, but for strategic dismantling. One of John's closest advisors sat across from him, spreading photographs and documents across a large wooden table. "We've got everything," he said quietly, "every detail." But this wasn't about immediate revenge. This was about a systematic, calculated response that would teach a deeper lesson about respect, power, and consequences. In the city's complex social landscape, John understood something most people missed. True power isn't about immediate retaliation. It's about creating a response so precise, so calculated that the other person never sees it coming. The dealership manager received his first unusual call within a week. Nothing aggressive. Just a series of questions that seemed routine but carried a subtle threat. "We're conducting a routine review of workplace practices," the voice said. Calm, professional, absolutely terrifying in its precision. Security camera footage from the showroom became mysteriously interesting to several departments. Employment records started getting a closer look. The slap wasn't just a moment of racism, it was becoming an institutional problem. John's network moved like a chess grandmaster. Each piece placed with intention, each movement calculated to create maximum impact with minimum direct confrontation. The salesman began to feel it first, a strange tension. Colleagues became distant. Opportunities started to vanish. Nothing he could point to directly. Just a growing sense that something was fundamentally changing. In the world John navigated, revenge wasn't about immediate violence. It was about creating a response so systematic, so precise, that the original act would become a footnote in a much larger story of consequence. The city had its own rhythm, its own rules. And those rules were about to be dramatically rewritten. Weeks passed. The city continued its relentless rhythm, unaware of the quiet storm brewing beneath its surface. The salesman's world began to change in ways he couldn't understand. It started small, almost imperceptible. A missed promotion. A client who suddenly stopped returning calls. Whispers in the break room that seemed to stop whenever he approached. His wife noticed first. The tension in their home grew like a slow-spreading shadow. Dinner conversations became shorter. His usual confidence started to crack, revealing something more fragile underneath. At the dealership, things felt different. Managers began asking questions, not aggressive, just persistent. Routine workplace reviews that suddenly felt anything but routine. HR representatives with clipboard and calm expressions that somehow felt more threatening than any direct confrontation. Financial records became interesting. Tax documents got a closer look. Employment history started to unravel like a cheap sweater, with each thread pulled revealing something underneath. John's network worked with surgical precision. No direct threats, no obvious interference. Just a systematic dismantling of everything the salesman thought was solid. A local business contact suddenly became unavailable. A potential real estate deal fell through without explanation. Credit scores began to shift in mysterious ways. Nothing that could be directly traced. Nothing that seemed overtly connected. The salesman started to feel paranoid. Every phone call felt loaded with potential danger. Every meeting seemed to carry an undercurrent of something he couldn't quite understand. His colleagues began to create distance. Invitations stopped. Professional networks became subtly less accessible. It was like watching his entire professional world slowly shrink, with no clear reason why. One evening, sitting in his living room, he realized something fundamental had changed. The confidence that once defined him, the belief that he could say or do anything without consequence, was gone. John's approach wasn't about immediate revenge. It was about creating a response so systematic, so precise, that the original act would become a footnote in a much larger story of consequence. The city had its own rules, its own rhythm, and those rules were being rewritten, one careful move at a time. Insurance policies became complicated. Background checks started showing inconsistencies. Professional recommendations became harder to obtain. Each day brought a new subtle challenge that chipped away at his professional identity. His wife suggested counseling. His friends became fewer. The world he once navigated with such confidence was slowly becoming unrecognizable. What the salesman didn't understand was that this wasn't just about punishment. It was about education, about showing that actions carry consequences beyond a single moment of anger. John watched from a distance, not with anger, not with hatred, but with a calm understanding that some lessons are learned slowly, painfully, systematically. The game was far from over, and the most significant moves were yet to be made. Rock bottom isn't always a sudden fall. Sometimes it's a slow descent, a gradual realization that everything you thought was solid is actually quicksand. The salesman's life was becoming that quicksand. Professional opportunities dried up like forgotten puddles in summer heat. His reputation, once something he wore like a badge of honor, was crumbling faster than he could comprehend. Corporate headquarters started asking questions, not aggressive questions, just precise, calculated inquiries that felt like surgical instruments dissecting his entire professional history. His performance records got a microscopic examination. Every past interaction, every customer complaint, every single moment of his professional life became suddenly significant. Things he thought were long forgotten were now front and center. The dealership's management called him in. A cold, sterile conference room with fluorescent lights that seemed to strip away every layer of comfort. No accusations, just questions. Calm, professional questions that felt like slow-moving daggers. "Tell us about your interactions with customers," they said, simple words that carried the weight of his entire career. His wife had already started looking for alternative options, smaller jobs, different cities, anything to restart their life. The confidence that once defined their household was gone, replaced by a constant, gnawing uncertainty. Financial strain became their new reality. Credit cards maxed out, savings depleting. Every bill felt like another nail in a coffin of his old life. The networks he once trusted were systematically closing their doors. What the salesman didn't understand was the precision of the response. This wasn't about immediate revenge. This was about a systemic dismantling of everything he represented. John's network worked like an invisible machine. Each move calculated, each action precise. No direct threats, no obvious interference. Just a methodical deconstruction of a life built on prejudice and unchecked privilege. Local business connections started to fade. Professional recommendations became impossible to obtain. Every door that once seemed wide open was now slowly, deliberately closing. The city had its own rhythm, its own unwritten rules. And those rules were being rewritten with a calm, calculated precision that was more powerful than any direct confrontation. Community networks, the invisible web of relationships that truly define professional success, began to shift. Whispers replaced conversations. Subtle hints replaced direct communication. The salesman was becoming radioactive, professionally speaking. His children started noticing. Fewer play dates. Subtle changes in how other parents interacted. The consequences of his actions were spreading beyond his professional life, touching every aspect of his existence. John watched from a distance, not with hatred, not with anger, but with a calm understanding that some lessons require a complete deconstruction of everything one believes. This wasn't about destruction. This was about transformation, about showing that actions carry consequences far beyond a single moment of anger. The most significant moves were yet to be made, and the salesman's world was about to change in ways he could never anticipate. Professional destruction happens quietly. Like water slowly eroding stone, it doesn't announce itself with dramatic crashes, but with persistent, unrelenting pressure. The salesman's world continued to crumble. Corporate investigations became more than routine. They transformed into a comprehensive dismantling of his entire professional existence. Human resources started digging deeper, not just into recent events, but into his entire professional history. Old complaints resurfaced. Minor incidents that were once overlooked now became significant red flags. Every interaction, every email, every performance review became potential evidence. His colleagues began to distance themselves, not dramatically, not with loud confrontations, just a slow, systematic withdrawal. Lunch invitations stopped. Professional networking connections began to vanish. It was like watching a social network dissolve, one connection at a time. The dealership's management realized they were sitting on a potential liability. His past behavior wasn't just an isolated incident, it was a pattern. A dangerous pattern that could expose the entire organization to significant legal and financial risks. Insurance companies started asking questions. Professional liability became a complex calculation. Risk assessments became more complicated. Each document, each conversation carried the weight of potential legal consequences. His family felt the pressure. Dinner table conversations became quieter. The tension was no longer just professional, it had seeped into every aspect of their personal life. Children started hearing whispers. School interactions became more challenging. John's network moved with surgical precision. No direct threats, no obvious interference, just a systematic deconstruction of a professional life built on unchecked prejudice. Local business networks, those invisible webs of connection that truly define professional success, began to shift. Recommendations became impossible. Professional opportunities vanished like morning mist. The salesman started to understand something fundamental. Power isn't about a single moment of aggression. It's about the complex networks that can quietly dismantle everything you've built. Corporate training programs became mandatory, diversity workshops, sensitivity training. Each session felt like another layer of professional skin being peeled away, revealing the raw vulnerability underneath. His legal options were systematically limited. Professional associations began reviewing his membership. Certification boards started asking uncomfortable questions. Each professional avenue became a potential minefield. The city had its rhythm, its unwritten rules. And those rules were being rewritten with a calm, calculated precision that was more powerful than any direct confrontation. What started as a single moment in a car dealership had transformed into a comprehensive deconstruction of an entire professional identity. Not through violence, not through dramatic confrontation, but through a systematic, institutional response that touched every aspect of his professional existence. John watched from a distance, not with hatred, not with revenge, but with a calm understanding that some lessons require a complete reconstruction of how one understands power, respect, and consequences. This wasn't about destruction, this was about transformation, about showing that actions carry consequences far beyond a single moment of anger. The most significant moves were yet to be made, and the salesman's world was about to change in ways he could never anticipate. Some stories end with a bang, this one ended with a whisper. The salesman's life had become unrecognizable. What once seemed like an unstoppable career now looked like a distant memory, fading like an old photograph left too long in sunlight. Job applications became a nightmare. Background checks revealed layers of complexity he never anticipated. Each form, each interview became a minefield of potential rejection. The confidence that once defined him had completely disappeared. His family felt the weight of his transformation. Conversations became shorter. Hopes became smaller. The dream of professional stability had shattered into 1,000 tiny pieces. The city continued its relentless rhythm. People moved. Businesses changed. But for him, time seemed to stand still. Each day brought a new challenge, a new reminder of that single moment in the dealership. Corporate networks that once seemed wide open now looked like closed doors. Professional recommendations became impossible. His reputation, once something he thought was unbreakable, had become toxic. John's network worked with surgical precision, no dramatic confrontations, no public humiliation, just a systematic deconstruction of a professional life built on prejudice. Legal channels started closing. Professional associations reviewed his membership. Certification boards asked uncomfortable questions. Every professional avenue became a potential dead end. His wife began exploring opportunities in different cities, smaller towns, places where they could restart. The life they once knew was gone, replaced by a constant state of uncertainty. Children noticed the change. Fewer birthday party invitations, subtle shifts in social interactions. The consequences of his actions had spread far beyond a single moment of anger. The dealership became a distant memory. His once promising career reduced to a cautionary tale whispered in corporate training rooms. Diversity workshops now used his story as an example of what not to do. Financial pressures mounted, savings depleted, credit became a distant dream. Each bill, each rejected application was another reminder of how completely his world had changed. What started as a moment of racist aggression had transformed into a comprehensive deconstruction of an entire professional identity, not through violence, not through dramatic revenge, but through a systematic, institutional response that touched every aspect of his existence. John watched from a distance, not with hatred, not with triumph, but with a calm understanding that some lessons require a complete reconstruction of how one understands power, respect, and human dignity. The city had its rhythm, its unwritten rules, and those rules had been rewritten with a calm, calculated precision that was more powerful than any direct confrontation. This wasn't about destruction. This was about transformation, about showing that actions carry consequences far beyond a single moment of anger. The final lesson was simple. Respect isn't something you can slap away. It's something you earn, carefully with every interaction, every moment of human connection. Years passed. Time has a way of revealing deeper truths. The salesman's life had become a distant memory, not just for others, but for himself. What once seemed like an unshakable world had completely disappeared, replaced by something entirely unexpected. John never sought traditional revenge. His response was something far more powerful, a systematic lesson about consequence, respect, and human dignity. In a small coffee shop, years after that fateful day in the dealership, the two men might have passed each other. No dramatic confrontation, no heated words, just two people who had been fundamentally changed by a single moment. The city had transformed. Workplace training programs became more comprehensive. Diversity workshops evolved from simple checklists to deep, meaningful conversations about human respect. The ripple effects of that single slap had created waves of institutional change. Corporate cultures began to shift. Companies started looking deeper, not just at surface-level diversity numbers, but at the actual human experiences happening within their walls. The kind of casual racism that once went unchallenged now became a serious professional liability. John's network had always been about more than just personal revenge. It was about creating systemic change, about showing that prejudice carries consequences far beyond a single moment of anger. The salesman's children grew up understanding something profound. They learned that actions have weight, that respect isn't something you're born with, but something you continuously earn through your interactions with others. His wife found strength in the transformation. What could have destroyed a family became a journey of understanding, of growth. They relocated, started over, learned difficult but important lessons about human connection. The dealership that once seemed like a fortress of unchecked behavior underwent complete restructuring. New leadership, new training programs, a commitment to creating a truly inclusive environment. John never celebrated, never gloated. His response was always about education, not punishment, about showing that systemic change happens through patient, calculated action. What began as a moment of racist aggression had transformed into a powerful lesson about human dignity, not through violence, not through dramatic revenge, but through a systematic response that touched every aspect of institutional behavior. The city continued its rhythm. People came and went, businesses changed, but the underlying message remained. Respect is not optional, it's fundamental. In quiet moments, John would reflect on that day, not with anger, not with satisfaction, but with a deep understanding that change happens slowly. That true power lies not in immediate retaliation, but in creating meaningful, lasting transformation. The final lesson was simple yet profound. Every action creates a ripple. Every moment of disrespect carries consequences far beyond what we can immediately see. The story wasn't about winning or losing. It was about understanding, about showing that the most powerful response to hatred is not more hatred, but a systematic, compassionate approach to creating genuine change. And in the end, that's exactly what happened.